When a 41-year-old wife and mother vanished on a cold February night in 2006, the urgent call to 911 did not come from a family member, but instead from a concerned coworker who feared the worst. When authorities went to the woman's home to perform a welfare check, they immediately became concerned when they spotted blood and a hastily cleaned SUV in the garage. But that would only be the first of their concerning discoveries. By the time the case was over, they would uncover a shocking relationship, an overlooked condom, and a plot twist that revealed just how far someone would go to cover their tracks. Welcome back to Crime A to Z, where we detail cases and criminals from their very beginning until well after other reporting ends. Today, we'll be talking about the chilling case of Tami Reay, whose disappearance and the bizarre events that followed turned the case into a roller coaster ride for everyone involved. Every time investigators would dig deeper or follow a lead, it would reveal a fresh, new bombshell. Let's dive into the case. And before we get started, if you end up liking this video, we'd appreciate it if you could help us out by clicking like, share, and subscribe. As always, we sincerely appreciate all of your wonderful support. Let's go. Tamra Donnell Burns, who went by Tammy, was born on June 15, 1964 in Lander, Wyoming. She was the eldest of 3 daughters to parents Donald and Bonnie Burns. Having grown up surrounded by the vast landscapes of the Wyoming wilderness, Tammy loved exploring nature and the great outdoors. She graduated from Lander Valley High School in 1982, where she excelled in volleyball. It was that sport that landed her a scholarship to Central Wyoming College. After her 2 years at the community college, her adventurous spirit led her to explore living in other parts of Wyoming, then ultimately landed her in Sacramento, California. She remained there for 4 years working in women's retail. Even from a distance, Tammy stayed closely connected with her family, regularly calling her mother and sisters. When Tammy was 27, she went to visit her sister Raquel in Billings, Montana. While she was there, Raquel introduced her to Brad Reay. Raquel worked with Brad at a restaurant where he was a bartender and she was a waitress. Brad had been previously married and had a 9-year-old son from that marriage. Tammy and Brad were instantly attracted to each other. Tammy was charmed by Brad's calm and quiet demeanor. When Tammy's parents, Don and Bonnie, first met Brad, they quickly approved. He came across as hardworking and dependable, seemingly the perfect match for Tammy. The couple's relationship skyrocketed, and a year into their relationship, Brad proposed and Tammy joyfully accepted. The couple married, and in 1993, they welcomed their daughter Haley into the world. For Tammy, life seemed to be unfolding perfectly. Having a daughter was her life's dream. She embraced motherhood, making Haley the center of her universe. With Haley adopting both her mother's sport of volleyball as well as her love of the outdoors, the extremely close-knit mother and daughter would spend weekends on camping trips, whitewater rafting, and exploring. Tammy reveled in every moment with her daughter, especially attending all her extracurricular activities. Tammy got a part-time job at Skyview High School in Billings and happily balanced the demands of motherhood and work. Meanwhile, Brad started a job at Walmart in an entry-level position. He was dedicated to his job, optimistic that his hard work would eventually help him move up in the company. And while focused on expanding his career, he and Haley also had their own special rituals, like fishing trips and television nights. Back at Walmart, Brad's dedication and hard work started to pay off. Proving himself to be a valuable employee, he caught the attention of his supervisors and was promoted to assistant manager. But his career milestone came with a price. The family would have to relocate to Pierre, South Dakota. So, in August of 2004, the small family of 3 packed their bags and headed to South Dakota. Once there, the family settled in. 11-year-old Haley joined several sports teams to help her get involved and adjust to her new environment. So with Haley busy with extracurriculars and Brad's new job demanding nearly all of his time and attention, Tammy decided it was time for her to return to work. She secured a job at Kmart, where her retail experience landed her a position in the shoe department. The job gave her another outlet to interact with people, while still maintaining close ties with her family back in Wyoming. Despite them living 600 miles away, she would call her parents every morning without fail. It was a ritual that Tammy had maintained for years. But on the morning of February 8, 2006, that routine was broken. At 6:45 a.m., Tammy's mother Bonnie noticed that her phone had not rang. Concerned, she dialed Tammy's home phone. No answer. She tried her cell phone. Voicemail. She began to worry. By 9 a.m., Bonnie was joined by one of Tammy's sisters, Raquel. They continued frantically calling Tammy's cell and home numbers, but all the calls went unanswered. They decided to check and see whether Tammy was at her part-time job at Kmart, so Raquel called the store. The woman who answered the phone placed her on hold while they paged Tammy over Kmart's PA system, but there was no response. She wasn't there. The family had not been particularly close to Tammy's husband, Brad, and hadn't even considered calling him. But then Bonnie remembered something Tammy had mentioned over Christmas about a coworker at Kmart, a manager named Brian. Hoping that the coworker might have some answers, Bonnie called Kmart again, this time asking if there was a manager named Brian that worked there. There was. When he came to the phone, Bonnie introduced herself as Tammy's mother and explained the situation. Brian said that he hadn't seen Tammy and didn't know where she might be, but he did remember her mentioning a new job at a local pharmacy. He told her that he would call the pharmacy, then get back to her. The news was not good. The pharmacy had not heard from Tammy. Growing desperate, they called Haley at school. Haley told them the last time she saw her mother was on the previous night. She also mentioned that she noticed that her mother's purse and cell phone were still on the counter at home. Feeling helpless, Bonnie and Raquel called Brian back and asked him to contact the police, which he did.
To the police department.
Yeah, I need to file a missing persons report.
Your name, please?
I'm Brian Clark.
Who's missing?
Tami Reay.
Spell the last name?
Reay. Foul play could be suspected here.
Okay, and why do you think that, sir?
Hopefully this is discreet, but me and her have been having an affair. Apparently her husband has found out about it.
Okay, what is his name?
Brad. Reay. Reay.
The revelation of the affair stunned both the police and Tammy's family. It meant that Tammy was living a life that none of them had ever imagined. And it also suddenly placed her husband as the prime suspect in her disappearance. Detectives headed to Walmart to question Brad. They informed him that Tammy had not shown up for work and asked him when he had last seen her. Brad explained that he had finished work around 10 o'clock the previous night and returned home to find that Tammy was not yet home and Haley was already asleep. He said that he heard his wife drive up a while later, saw her get out of her car and get into another car and leave. He said that he attempted to follow them in Tammy's Durango, but the car stopped while he was driving and wouldn't start again. As proof, he explained how a highway patrolman came up behind him to offer assistance. When the trooper arrived, Brad told him that he was making a quick trip to the store. The encounter was caught on police video and placed Brad in his wife's Durango at 1:40 a.m. He had not mentioned at the time that he was trying to follow his wife. With written consent from Brad, police descended on his home in search of clues. Within moments of entering the garage, they noticed blood on the Durango's running boards dripping onto the concrete floor. In the back of the vehicle, they were overwhelmed by a strong bleach odor and swirl marks on the surfaces, both of which indicated that there had been an attempt to clean the vehicle. It appeared that this missing person case did indeed involve foul play. Detectives secured the scene and brought Brad in for questioning. He maintained his innocence, insisting he had nothing to do with Tammy's disappearance. He admitted he knew about her affair, but said that he did not know who she was having it with. He also acknowledged that they had been sleeping in separate rooms for years. But despite that, he thought that they could still work things out. 2 hours in, investigators had had enough of Brad's denials and ramped up the questioning. One of the investigators stated, "You're starting to jerk our chain. An innocent man would have looked at me and said, 'Listen, you need to find my wife. I'll tell you anything you want to know. You guys are talking to the wrong guy.'" The investigator was right. While Brad vehemently denied any involvement in Tammy's disappearance, he made no effort to help investigators find her. The circumstantial evidence seemed to point to Brad. He had just learned his wife wanted a divorce and was having an affair. But without a body and with Brad claiming he believed he and his wife could still work things out, detectives had little to go on. 5 hours into the interrogation, worn down by the questioning, Brad finally asked for a lawyer. Although the questioning was forced to a halt, detectives felt that they had enough grounds to arrest Brad for suspicion of murder. Meanwhile, the search for Tammy continued. Volunteers, cadaver dogs, aircraft, and investigators combed through the acres of wilderness surrounding Pierre, searching for a body or any clues that might lead to Tammy's whereabouts. It was toward the end of the day, as they were about to call it quits, that one of the helicopter searchers had a feeling and was drawn to a tree-lined area nearby. Once there, he noticed something out of place. It was Tammy. Her body had been discarded in a desolate area 10 miles from town. It was the same location where Brad used to take Haley to practice driving. Tammy's body was naked, and her throat was viciously slashed. The defensive marks on her hands indicated that she had been involved in a desperate struggle to fight off her attacker. She had been stabbed over 30 times in what investigators would later describe as a frenzied crime of passion and rage. With Tammy's body discovered, investigators returned their attention to the case and their arrested suspect. Upon digging deeper, it was time for a mountain of secrets and astonishing plot twists to emerge. Colleagues and neighbors knew Brad as a quiet, reserved, hardworking man dedicated to providing for his family. The thought that this gentleman could be involved in his wife's disappearance seemed unimaginable. But those who knew Tammy were familiar with a different side of Brad. At home, he was suffocatingly clingy and controlling. Tammy's family had long been aware of the oppressive hold that Brad had on her. His constant presence and refusal to give Tammy any personal space had become a major source of tension in their marriage. Having decided to divorce Brad, Tammy began confiding in her co-worker, Brian Clark. His friendship offered her the emotional support that she craved. But Brian himself was also in an unhappy marriage, complete with children. And by 2005, what began as a close friendship had evolved into a full-fledged affair. Tammy found herself in unfamiliar and completely unexpected territory. She never imagined she would be unfaithful in her marriage, no matter the circumstances and turmoil that brought her there. Brian also found himself grappling with how their secret relationship could destroy his own marriage. He was adamant that Tammy keep their affair hidden, no matter the cost. In the first week of February 2006, Tammy made a decision. She confessed her affair to her husband and told him she wanted a divorce. He was not happy. But once he accepted that Tammy was set in her decision, they shared the painful news with Haley. With Tammy feeling hope for the first time in a long time, she continued her regular life and routines, content and optimistic. Brad, on the other hand, withdrew, spending long hours in bed, unmotivated to get out. Then, Tammy vanished. The couple's history was eye-opening to authorities, but none of it was conclusive. While the Rays had their share of marital problems, Brad had no history of violence, no criminal record, and his alibi about being stopped by a trooper checked out. It all raised doubts about whether they actually had the right person. Investigators wanted to be sure that they explored all options and all suspects. So, on deck was Tammy's secret lover and co-worker, Brian Clark. They brought him in for questioning. He arrived with a lawyer and a very guarded demeanor, which piqued investigators' suspicion. Innocent people don't typically request legal counsel so early in an investigation. During the interview, Brian admitted to the affair and revealed that he and Tammy had met at a motel just one day before she was reported missing. According to Brian, Tammy said she was finally ready to leave Brad after years of unhappiness. After their motel encounter, Brian said that he went home and spent that evening with his wife. He said that they attended a local basketball game where there were eyewitnesses who could back up his alibi, then was at home the remainder of the night. But his alibi came with a request. He pleaded with investigators to not question his wife about his whereabouts on that night since she was unaware of his affair. But they didn't have a choice. Talking to her would reveal whether he was shielding her from his affair or lying about his alibi and guilty of something far more criminal. Devastated, Brian's wife confirmed that he had indeed been with her and their daughter at the basketball game, and that they spent the rest of the night at home. But his alibi was not airtight. Although the couple shared a bedroom, Brian's wife often slept in a recliner downstairs because of her back pain, which was exactly where she slept on the night of the murder, leaving open the possibility that Brian could have slipped out unnoticed. As Tammy's husband remained in custody, the investigation pressed on. But with no definitive evidence against Brad or Brian and no other suspects in sight, they continued to build their case against the incarcerated Brad, hoping to gather enough evidence to take it to trial. Then, they received an unexpected clue. One day, 4 handwritten letters arrived in the mail addressed to police and prosecutors. They named Tammy's lover, Brian Clark, as her killer. The letters included details that only the killer would know. The writer said he was Brian's cousin and that Brian had confessed the murder to him. He described how Brian had brutally sexually assaulted Tammy and then went on to make a shocking claim that took the investigators completely by surprise. He said that Brian had left a crucial piece of evidence behind: a condom, still inside of Tammy. Investigators immediately contacted the pathologist, who upon closer inspection confirmed that there was indeed an overlooked condom found in Tammy's rectum. This new piece of evidence lined up with what the letters claimed and with what Brad had been telling police all along: that Brian Clark, not Brad, had murdered Tammy in cold blood. So the list of evidence implicating Brian continued to grow. From his secret affair with Tammy, to his wife not being able to verify his alibi for the entire night, to the letters sent to police stating that he confessed to the murders, and the damning condom containing his sperm found in Tammy's body. It was not looking good for Brian. But it turned out that Brian did not have to worry about being a suspect. Although he had a clear motive, given his affair with Tammy and the threat it posed to his marriage and reputation, police knew otherwise. They had actually been recording and monitoring Brad's jailhouse phone calls and letters from day one. So they knew that the letters were not at all written by Brian's mysterious cousin, but had instead been elaborately engineered by Brad. He had been working with his twin brother Brett Reay to help copy and send the letters to police to try to frame Brian for the murders. Once authorities had begun monitoring Brad's jailhouse phone calls and letters, Brad graciously funneled them the evidence they needed to make their case. One of the most incriminating of which was a hand-drawn map that Brad sent to his brother, pinpointing what he described as fishing spots around Oahe Dam. But when detectives explored the pinpointed spots Brad identified on the map, it led them to 3 garbage bags hidden along a row of juniper shrubs. The bags contained bloody linens and a bloody tarp, rubber gloves, and a box of condoms, with one missing. The tarp had slits in it, indicating that Tammy had been repeatedly stabbed while she was in the tarp. The bags were found hidden in vegetation that matched what was collected from the bottom of Brad's shoes after the disappearance. Then there were those letters attempting to frame Brian for the murders. Police confiscated the copies of the letters from his brother and arrested him as well, charging him with accessory to murder. His brother confessed to helping with the scheme, and facing up to 20 years in prison, he served 6 months in jail before agreeing to testify against Brad. And of course, there was the forensic evidence collected from the couple's garage, including blood found on the Durango. Going into trial, investigators concluded that Brad had killed Tammy as she slept, having secretly placed a tarp and blankets over the mattress to soak up the blood when he attacked her. They theorized that Brad had attacked Tammy first while she slept, then potentially attacked her again later. The case against Brad was solid. For 11 months, Brad had maintained his innocence, insisting that the truth would set him free. But with everything authorities had learned, they were confident that they knew the truth, and being free was not where it would lead him. But the scheming bomb dropper had one more card to play, and he was saving it until the very last moment. On the first day of the trial, as prosecutors approached the courthouse, they remained confident that their case would result in a conviction. But just a half hour before the prosecution was set to make their opening statement, in a twist that no one anticipated, Brad Reay dropped his bombshell. His truth that he had alluded to for so long was that the murderer was not him. Instead, he said it was his 13-year-old daughter, Haley, and that he was merely covering up for her actions to protect her. His defense revolved around the startling claim that Haley was depressed and angry about her parents' divorce, had been sleepwalking, and murdered her mother. According to Brad, he was awakened by their cat and rushed to the scene, where he found Haley in Tammy's room holding a bloody knife and covered in blood. He said that she did not awaken from her catatonic state until he was done cleaning her and had placed her back in her bed. Then he asked her, "Haley, what have you done?" He said she was silent. He claimed that in a desperate attempt to protect her, he cleaned the scene, planted evidence to mislead investigators, and then disposed of Tammy's body near the Missouri River. He even acknowledged attempting to incriminate Brian. He said he did everything except the actual murder. He claimed that once he discovered what his daughter had done, he did what a dad had to do to protect his daughter. And it wasn't just a passing claim. To back it up, he argued that a potential bite mark found on Tammy's breast actually resembled the pattern of Haley's gapped front teeth. He also claimed that DNA from blood found in the Durango that was not Tammy's and could not be ruled out as his could have been Haley's. But Haley's account of the night's events was nowhere near what Brad described. She described how, in the middle of the night, her father entered her room with a bundle of clothes and laid down beside her before she fell back asleep. When Haley woke up the next morning, she said the laundry machines were running, and she noticed several things that didn't seem right. Her mother's bed was unmade and her cell phone and purse were still in the home, and her car was still in a garage. Haley said that when she asked where her mother was, her father said that she was with a boyfriend. He instructed Haley to keep it private, telling her, "Don't tell anybody because it's personal." Haley found herself in the position of having to defend herself against her father's accusations, all while he callously looked on, even occasionally smiling. She testified as she loved her mother, but was scared of her father and had never been close to him. Brad's defense attorney's response was to claim that Haley didn't remember the events due to the intense trauma she encountered. He also came after her on the stand, asking her to describe the motion she would use to strike a ball when she played volleyball, trying to equate it to how she would have gone about stabbing her mother. But the reality was that there was no way that a 12-year-old girl could have forced the knife to penetrate Tammy's body the way the killer did, plunging it a full 2 inches deeper in the length of the actual blade. Between the accusation, the framing, and then attacking her on the stand, it was as low as a father could go. Brad was feeling so confident in his ability to sway the jury that he made the extremely rare decision of taking the stand. The prosecution grilled him for hours, while Brad constantly changed his answers and shifted his story. The prosecution couldn't have asked for better testimony, with the Attorney General commenting that Brad was the best witness he'd ever had. So it was Brad's underhanded tactics and poor performance on the stand that the jury took to their deliberations. And on January 23, 2007, it took them just 3 hours to find Brad Reay guilty of first-degree murder. After the verdict, the Attorney General remarked that Brad's claim that his daughter killed her mother was the most cowardly blame-sharing act he'd seen from a defendant in 27 years. Brad was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, which is the mandatory sentence for first-degree murder when the death penalty is not pursued. After the loss of her mother and betrayal of her father, Haley found refuge living with her maternal grandparents. She made the decision to sever all ties with her father. Tammy's family leaned on each other for support and became advocates against domestic violence. Haley, in particular, dedicated her life to honoring her mother. She channeled her experience into a passionate mission as a victims' rights advocate and speaker. Using her platform and personal story, she raised awareness about domestic violence. She traveled across the United States to educate others on the early warning signs of abuse, particularly emotional abuse. Brian Clark has remained private since the trial, with no public details about his life since then. Brad Reay was sent to serve his life sentence in the South Dakota State Penitentiary. He attempted to appeal his conviction numerous times, essentially claiming that his counsel didn't fight hard enough to show that his daughter was the culprit. He was unsuccessful. He served 17 years before his death in February of 2024, when he passed away in the prison infirmary at the age of 64. What are your thoughts about this father who claimed to be protecting his daughter only to conjure up the most mind-boggling method of betrayal imaginable? Or about Haley, who flipped the script and chose to represent and advocate for all the good that her father did not? Let us know in the comments below, and please remember to hit like and share if you like this video. And of course, subscribe and hit the bell icon to be notified about any of our future videos.